Hello, welcome to the Sideboard here at the Star City Games Modern Open in Atlanta, part of the SCG Tour, brought to you by Ultimate Guard and Cardox Chairs. Nick Miller alongside Team Nova's Aaron Barich. How we doing?
Doing great. I'm playing my favorite deck, so.
I love to see it. A couple weeks ago, people were getting ready for regionals, and I was championing Infect with all these Urza nonsense decks going around, and you're just out here doing Lord's work. Infect back on the map. We have 1 billion new cards. I can't believe how many new cards Infect has to play with, but between Oko, Veil of Summer, Scale Up, Once Upon a Time,
it's a lot.
We've got it all.
Yeah, Infect is a deck that stagnates at times because there's so few cards you can put in the deck because you can't really add creatures because there's nothing printed with Infect, and they don't print mana dorks as good as Noble Hierarchs, so you can't really play anything like that. So the cards that get added are usually sideboard slots and things of that nature, but they've given me a couple cards I'm actually playing in my main board in addition to great sideboard things. And I haven't played Infect in Modern in a while. It's used to be a deck I played nearly every weekend on the SCG Tour, and it was the deck I'm most known for. And I realized how long it had been since I played it when I was re-sleeving this deck, and I had to de-sleeve my Dazes to get the Infect cards out of that deck. Yeah. So the only time I played Infect like the past 4 months has been in Legacy, because I thought the deck just hasn't been super well positioned.
Not great in a Wrenn and 6 world. Right.
Modern Horizons was a set that was really rough for Infect. They printed Wrenn and 6, they printed Plague Engineer. Those cards are really, really hard to beat. In addition to that, Burn became very popular with the addition of Sunday Canyon, and that matchup's always been a little unfavorable for Infect. But Infect has slowly kind of got some tools, things that really fix some of the deck's problems. Infect's biggest issue has always been its consistency, because your deck is, 12 creatures with Infect, a bunch of pump spells and some lands, and if you don't draw the right mix of those, your deck just doesn't function. And they have decided to bless me with cards like Once Upon a Time.
They gave us this one, Once Upon a Time. A lot of people spotted this as, the free card, gonna help a lot of archetypes. A lot of people went to Amulet, Tron as their first impressions of this card. But here, I think really a sleeper pick for one of the best decks it could go into.
Yeah, people kind of miss on the fact, they're like, well, it doesn't grab pump spells. And that's kind of true. But your deck often doesn't have a problem having pump spells, and in fact that's a card the things you board out are generally pump spells because you have too many in your main deck because you're really trying to make your deck have that consistent kill game one. What often happens is you're forced to mulligan and you are really needing a threat or land. People think of Infect as a deck that plays off 2 mana because you can go Glistener Elf into 2 pump spells and kill your opponent, but that's not how the deck really works. A lot of your matchups, you need 3 or 4 mana so you can fight these fights with protection, or you need to be able to animate your Inkmoth Nexus and still cast spells. So Once Upon a Time being a card that helps increase your threat density because there are no threats printed for the deck, and increase your land count at the same time, helps show up a lot of the problems the deck is having.
Right. So first off the bat, Once Upon a Time, just nuts.
Yeah, very good.
We did get, from Modern Horizons, Scale Up and Waterlogged Grove, so, a recent addition to the deck.
Thank you, Tom Ross, for working on Modern Horizons. I asked him about it. He's like, I didn't design the card, but they sure asked me if it was okay. So it got the Tom Ross seal of approval to be printed, and I'm so happy it is. Right,
so we have the normal Infect cards here. We have the cards that aren't going anywhere. Blight Agent, Glistener Elf, Inkmoth Nexus, Noble Heart. Those are never leaving.
I'm working on some stuff, but we'll see.
Traditional Simic Infect, those are your cards. Then we have the pump spell assortment, Might Old Krosa, Groundswell, Blossoming Defense, Vines of Ashwood. Then we have, the mix-ups. We don't see any mutagenic growths here. We only see one Become Immense, and then we have the Scale Up package as well. Talk about how you chose your pump spells, and most importantly, the lack of mutagenic growth.
Yeah, mutagenic growth is one of those cards that people just assume is one of the best pump spells in Infect, right? It's a free spell. The Phyrexian spell mechanic is broken. Like, so many of the cards are banned because, rightfully so, they're stupid. But mutagenic growth is just such a weak card individually. It is only +2/+2 when your deck is full of +4/+4s. Not only that, the life loss is real in some of your bad matchups. Things like Burn, mutagenic growths can be a bit of a liability. Not only that, with the addition of Once Upon a Time, you have to find space. So you're not trying to cut creatures, realistically. Maybe you can cut 1, maybe. And you can't really cut more than 1 land, so you have to cut something. And instead of cutting flex slots like my dismembers or people have main deck spell peers, I decided to cut mutagenic growths. Because since I have those slots filled with now Once Upon a Time, I'm going to have less pump spells in a game on average. So I need those few pump spells I have to be impactful ones.
Yeah.
I need them to be +4s or +5s. And mutagenic growth just doesn't pull enough weight in that regard. And that's why I'm on 4 mites, 3 groundswells, and 3 scale-ups to try and maximize that. In addition to that, Ren and 6 is on a kind of a downslope. Jund decks are low, the fairer decks are more shadow-based, and they're not playing Ren and 6. Same thing with like Plague Engineer. That card has really fallen off because decks like Humans have fallen off, so there's less tribal things that people are trying to beat up with Plague Engineer. That helps the deck, not that mutagenic growth beats Plague Engineer.
Right.
But the Mono Red Prowess deck is now on a decline. There's less Lava Darts and Gut Shots going around. So you need that growth less. That card is really only ever good at countering cheap interaction. It was never a great pump spell. It allowed you turn 2 kills, but you have scale up for that now.
Yep.
So you have the same amount of turn 2 kill potential, realistically, and you just don't have to play this weak top deck that you board out a lot. You get to clear up a lot of spots and play a lot of cards that are just much better, and it allows you to sideboard better, and because there are matchups where you want Might, matchups where you want Groundswell, and now you have to pick to which one to keep post-board, instead of just having to cut these mutagenic growths and be left with Might of Old Krosa.
Well, speaking of sideboard, here's where we get the pickups as well. Veil of Summer, no surprise here. This card is just going everywhere that's playing green, and I can't think of a better deck to utilize Veil of Summer than Infect.
Yeah, Infect is just a deck that gets all parts of the card. Infect is a deck that you're trying to protect your permanents. You're trying to protect your hand from Thoughtseizes, and you're trying to resolve important spells. It is a deck that has pretty much only green lands, so it's not hard to cast it on 1 or on 2 or leave up a green mana. It is just exactly what this deck is trying to do, because your opponent's plan against you is to kill your things, is to counter your spells, is to Thoughtseize you. Some Veil of Summer decks just kind of play it, because it's a good card, but my opponent's plan against me is to board in more cards that lose to Veil of Summer.
Yeah.
So this is also a deck where Infect isn't known for getting card advantage. It has a hard time against the Junds of the world because after they 1-for-1 you, they get to play their 1 value card, and it's going to 2-for-1 you, or 3-for-1 you, or 4-for-1 you, depending on whatever, and that will drown you because you don't have any source of advantage. Now Veil of Summer is a 2-for-1. A cheap 2-for-1 that is good in the early game, good in the mid game, good in the late game if you get there. It is exactly what this deck is wanting. I wish it countered Path to Exile or whatever, right? Against the blue-white decks.
Why couldn't they put white on there?
It only counters their cryptic commands and I kill them, but I guess that's fine.
Yeah. The other card, of course, Oko is just in every deck. It seems like I look around this tournament today. A natural inclusion, though.
Yeah, I think this is not a deck people thought Oko would go into because, people don't think about, I can make the 3/3s and attack an Infect, because people just assume you're going to die with Infect damage. But Oko does a lot. In Modern in general, one of the hardest parts of the format is picking your 15 sideboard cards because there's so little space. Mm-hmm. And in a deck like Infect, because your main deck has 0 answers to anything and is just a kill you deck, your sideboard is usually very taxed because you can only have 2 or 3 cards to beat whatever your opponent's doing in any given matchup. You can't really have more than 2 counter spells. You can't really have more than 2 or 3 shatters. You can't really have more than 2 kill spells in your deck. And Oko is able to consolidate that into 1 card, and that is something that this deck gets to do. It's something the Urza decks get to do as well. They don't play a lot of answers, but they play a lot of Okos. And these are the types of decks that really make Oko shine, because you're able to do that. Not only that, Infect is a history of boarding in a creature against grindy decks. Geist of St. Traft, Invisible Stalker, things like Nissa, Voice of Zendikar.
Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, Tarmogoyf. So there's all these creatures they would board in, but those cards don't always line up well against these mid-range decks anymore. Stoneforge Mystic getting unbanned made the damage plan so much worse if your opponent's a Stoneforge fair deck.
Yeah.
Your Geist of St. Traft isn't beating a Batterskull. You have to pump spell through it every single turn because you can't kill the Stoneforge Mystic. Yeah. So they can always pick it up and put it back into play. Same thing, against decks with Oko, damage is now just much harder to win through because they're going to have Oko against you anyway, right? So if you get to the point where they're able to gain 3 life every turn and you're drawing a Groundswell every turn, you're getting +1 damage, and that's not winning the game. Oko, though, is able to answer Batterskull, is able to pressure Planeswalkers very well by itself, while being a card that fills that shatter role against the Urza decks, right? I'm able to turn off their Thopter Foundry. I'm able to turn off their Moxen if I play at turn 2. That's a huge deal. Against decks like Jund and Shadow, Shrinking Tarmogoyf is a huge, huge deal. That card is such a problem. Death Shadow as well. So now instead of these cards being 6/7s and 8/8s or whatever, you're able to make them 3/3s, and now your pump spells kill them, instead of you being forced to make these chump blocks and try and drag this game out. And Veil of Summer, great at protecting Oko. Your deck, Spell Pierce, is good at protecting Oko. Not only that, if your opponent has to spend a lot of resources on this Oko, you sometimes get to kill them with the Inkmoth Nexus that's been sitting there. And Oko goes a long way against opposing Okos, where if my opponent is using their Oko to turn my Infectors into 3/3s, I'm able to make my food 3/3s, and suddenly I'm killing my opponent with damage.
Yeah, you have a ton of 3/3s now.
Right, and those decks aren't great at killing 3/3s because they think, well, I'm going to give them 1 or 2 3/3s, I'm going to chump block once or twice, I'm going to get a bunch of time. Well, against Infect, you give them a 3/3, and they still have 2 pump spells. And I'm going to hit you once with a 3/3, twice with a 3/3, and the third time it's attacking you for 12, and you're dead.
Yeah.
And if you weren't ready for that, and you're not planning on trying to gain that life, you're forced to use your Oko other ways, that's great. Oko, also a big thing, you can give your opponent Glistener for good permanence. They don't get to use it as well as you.
That's a nice combo. Just all the things this deck gets to do, as you mentioned, just condensing all these sideboard cards into one card.
Yep.
It's your creature, it's your Shatter, as you mentioned, it's everything. This is just the perfect deck for these 2 new cards. Outside of that, the Infect sideboard's pretty similar.
Yep.
You've got your Spell Skites, you've got your, Nature's Claims, your Ceremonious Rejections, this stuff. Outside of that, anything else you want to talk about with the deck this week?
Yeah, I mean, people might say I have too many Shatter effects. I have Nature's Claim and Rejection and Oko. They're for slightly different things, Against some of the Wurza decks, Oko's a little slow sometimes. You don't board them all in, only 2. Ceremonious Rejection's primarily for things like Tron and Eldrazi. We're able to counter things rather than try and blow them up. Nature's Claim also does double duty against things like Burn, blowing up Eidolon, or blowing up your Inkmoth to gain life, or sometimes you even blow up your own food to gain 4, because it saves you a mana and gains 1 extra. Past that, the only other interesting decision I think I really made in deck building is I'm on 3 Spell Skites, which is a card that has gone in and out of the Infect builds. It's a little better with Once Upon a Time because it gives you a protection spell to block, and it curves very well with Oko. Playing a Spell Skite on 2 into an Oko on 3, you're able to make one of the things in Elk, whatever problem permanent. It can't attack your Oko, and if they have an answer to your Oko, you're able to redirect it. Abrupt Decay, Assassin's Trophy, even Burn spells, most of them. So I think that combination is very powerful, and it wouldn't surprise me if those 2 cards maybe fit some other shell at some point, because they're both just pretty good cards. So that's something I'm going to be looking into. I really like my build. I decided to play all of the green mistakes that have been printed in the past while. You got your Once Upon a Time, your Veil, and your Oko, and I'm trying to put them to best use possible.
All right, it looks awesome. Thanks for joining me, Aaron, as usual. Stay tuned to Star City Games all weekend long for the action here in Atlanta.